press recording, yes. Hurrah. Okay. Monday again. All right. So, today will be short and sweet. I want to show you some old data of mine, just to support the ideas that I've started to introduce to you about how important it is to get the children active and more competent at their motor skills at a younger age, okay? So actually the data was collected 2011, so yeah, it's pretty old now. Hopefully we're going to collect some new data this semester if the CDC stays open, so we'll see how that goes. What else? No, I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions before we start about anything that we've covered so far, or anything that's coming? I know that that syllabus isn't complete yet. Trying to work out a point in time in the week where we could go to the playground to get some film for after midterm-ish, instead of you going to the playground. It's just difficult to find a slot in the week. So that's this week's goal, is to try to get that done so that we can start filming and have some backup for you in case the CDC is shut when we actually get to that point in time. I think that's it. Any questions? Kayla, you always have good questions.
Not today, I don't. I don't really have anything to input today.
Okay, all right. So, let's see. I'm not sure how this is going to look because it's a poster presentation that I did. Let's see what it looks like. Okay. Is there a way of making this bigger? Okay. All right, so what I wanted to show you was having a look at this data that we collected, and we haven't talked about Mastery Climate as a playground environment yet, but we will be. That's the kind of climate that I set up when I'm running my motor skill interventions. So it's very spread out, there's lots of toys available, there's lots of autonomy for the children. They're not put in teams or groups, or they get to free float and go where they want to with who they want to. And what we were looking at here was building on some work I had done in my dissertation, which was looking at heart rates and physical activity of the children when they're out on the playground doing this type of intervention. And as we work through the semester, you'll see that this idea is quite important. One, because we've already mentioned the fact that during a daycare day or a childcare day, the children are typically around 80% sedentary for the curriculum in a preschool. and in a typical preschool. So there are some, I was reading recently about a preschool in California, and they have no buildings. The entire day is spent outside. When it rains, they hang tarps from the trees and just sit under the tarp and carry on working. They eat outside, they play outside, they sleep outside. I'm just like, oh, I want to go there. That would be so cool. In a typical daycare, as I said, what we have is a lot of time sitting down or standing still, right? And not enough time moving if you think back to the Active Start guidelines that we were looking at on Friday, okay? So when we did the work on the dissertation, during the control days, the highest heart rate we got out of the children, so we had about, about 20 odd kids. The highest heart rate was 136 beats per minute, and the lowest was 113 beats per minute. And their resting heart rates anywhere from 80 to 100. So they weren't being very active, and certainly not for very long. And then when we went out and we did the play days with them, we got a low heart rate of 140 and a high heart rate of 173. So much more active and engaged when we're out there playing with them and running this intervention. Okay, so we wanted to take another look at that, partly because there's very little research on children in this area of the country, and so we wanted to take a look at that. And also, we just kind of wanted to see if the Mastery Climate worked in this environment, because you can't generalize with research protocols. You can't assume that so I ran my dissertation in Alabama, I can't assume that that intervention would have the same effect on children here or up in the Northwest or wherever. So we had to kind of do a baseline type study to find out what was going on. We believed that their heart rate and activity count would be higher on the days that we were there going into it. That was our hypothesis. And versus the days when we weren't there, but they were still out on the playground. So that's what we were comparing, was their time on the playground when we weren't there versus time when we were there playing. Okay? And the pictures show you some of the types of equipment and toys that I have at the playground. So we have bouncy balls, we have jumping sacks, we have a cool climbing rope. What else? Over here, oh yeah, these are the kids using the bouncy balls. Okay, so we've got all kinds of different equipment to help the children be active. And we use little heart rate monitors called ActiHearts, and I thought I had a picture on here of an ActiHeart, and I don't, I'm sorry. It's a small little round monitor. It's small, and you put it on, and with this age group, what I do is get that stretchy, self-sticking kind of athletic tape and wrap that around their chest to hold the monitor on so that they don't mess around with it, because if they fiddle with it all the time, it wrecks the data. And then I would pick different colors of tape, and the children could pick a color they wanted. And that kind of gets them engaged with wearing it and leaving it alone, hopefully. plan. So we have to go put the monitor on in the morning and then go and get it off of them before they go home. And it was pretty straightforward, you know, we just, we worked with the 4 and 5-year-olds and the 3 and 4-year-old classrooms. We ran the play sessions 3 times a week, and then we collected control data on the days we weren't there. And yeah, I think we only had about 10, 12 children for this study, so it was pretty small. The CDC doesn't have a lot of kids, which is one of the nice things about it. They all get a lot of individual attention. And what we found was really interesting, actually. And some of it was something we hadn't actually planned to look at. So what we saw was that our heart rate, the average heart rate for the children on the days that we weren't out there with them was about 108, okay? The average heart rate when we were out there doing the Mastery Climate was about 127. And that difference, 108 to 127, was significant. So mathematically, statistically, it was a significant difference. That means that we made the difference in the change in the heart rate. And we were also interested in activity count because this is just at the beginning of the information coming out, and we'll look at this model later in the semester, but Dave Stodden and some colleagues had just released a model that was looking at the connection between physical activity and motor competence. And they were suggesting that the more physically active children were also indicating higher motor competence at their fundamental skills, which is quite interesting, right? Because, you know, if I'm teaching the motor skills to everybody, then what we're seeing is it's not the teaching element that's really giving them the competence, it's that practice element that is linked to how physically active they are. So if they throw a couple of times and you help them to throw in, you know, maybe they're throwing ipsilateral and you get them to throw by taking an opposition step a couple of times. And that's great, but if they then go and sit in the sand for the next 20 minutes and don't practice stepping in opposition, it's likely that the next time they come out on the playground, they'll be back to stepping ipsilateral, okay? So that was kind of the idea behind this data set, was trying to support what Dr. Stodden had published. So we were looking at the activity count as well as the heart rate. And on the days, you can see here, the days we weren't there, the activity count was about 158 on average amongst the children. And when we were there, the activity count was 470. That's huge, right? That's a big indicator of how sedentary they are, even though they're outside on the playground, when they are not being purposely engaged with, right? That's huge. Okay? So they get outdoor free play and they go and sit on the swings. And then not only do they sit on the swings, but they expect the teachers to push them. So they do nothing, right? It's very frustrating. I get very frustrated. Now, what we hadn't planned on, but my friend that did the statistical analysis for me, he and his wife are a bit hot on statistics, and he couldn't help fiddling around with the data a little bit more, just couldn't stop himself. And what he saw was that when you looked at the data for the 2.5 hours after the outdoor time, that their mean heart rate was 108 versus 114. Right? So that is also a significant difference. So that means, for those of you that haven't taken XFIS yet, right? That means that during the 2.5 hours after the play session with me, they were burning a lot more calories than they were in the 2.5 hours after the play session when I wasn't there. Right? So that's important when we start looking at overweight and obesity issues that we say this population is starting to exhibit. Right? The more calories I'm using at rest, so the higher my metabolic rate when I'm resting, the more likely I am to be able to manage my weight. Right? It's one of the reasons for athletes and people who train regularly, it's not just the energy I use when I'm doing my exercise session. It's the fact that that exercise session knocks on to how much energy I use for a period of time after the exercise session. Okay? So the conclusion that we wrote at the time, and that I still think is really important, is that it's crucial that we build in planned physical play. Remember from Friday, planned physical play means that the adult has had some lesson plan or has deliberately picked certain toys to put out on the playground and is engaging with the children to get that and modeling physical activity, right? That's the planned play. And those guidelines said 60 minutes a day. That's nice. I think that would be perfect. I'm not sure how realistic that is within a preschool day. But even if you did 30 minutes a day, or 2 lots of 20 minutes a day, right? That would make a huge difference to these kids' heart rates and physical activity counts, and their motor skill competence, right? So we'd really like to see that planned physical play was initiated. Okay, does anybody else have trouble hearing me? Because I'm still getting a signal.
I hear you just fine.
Okay. Great, and I think that might be your end. Here, let me type that in. I think that. One of the problems in New Mexico in particular is that the early childhood curriculum, so if you go to university and take an early childhood degree in order to be a teacher or a head teacher at a daycare or preschool facility, In New Mexico, the curriculum for early childhood degrees does not involve motor development. And I have been trying for 14 years to get them to take motor development, but they have so many classes they have to take on that degree plan that there really isn't any wiggle room to add an additional class, right? So there's a couple of problems with that. You don't teach them how to teach movement, but then when you look at the requirements for preschool curriculum, so now they get qualified and they go to a preschool, the guidelines or the requirements for the curriculum for the preschool involve gross motor skills, right? So now you're asking a group of people with no training to teach gross motor skills. This is illogical, in my view. You wouldn't ask them to teach reading and not teach them how to teach reading, right? No one would do that. And what's really bizarre is in Alabama, when I taught this class in Alabama, I didn't teach it to HPE students, I taught it to early childhood students. So even in Alabama, motor development is on the early childhood curriculum for a degree plan, right? So that's nonsensical to me, right? It just is bizarre. The other thing that we wanted to point out was that the results really show how useful a mastery climate can be in helping the children be more active. In my view, that's a good thing, because in a mastery climate, I don't have to have a toy, the exact same toy for every single child, because there are lots of choices of toys all over the playground, right? So if I run a typical type PE, then I've got to have a bat for every child. Well, these things are expensive, right? So if you use a mastery climate approach, then you only need 5 balls, 5 bats, 5 beanbags, 5 hoops, 5 jumpy balls, right? I don't have to have 15, one for every child in the class. So, you know, financially, as well as physically, I think a mastery climate is a useful tool to have in your back pocket for creating this planned physical play that we've talked about. Okay? Questions? More questions? Comments? Ideas? I wish you guys were here, and then if you wanted to, you could help me collect data. That would be so cool. No questions? Okay. All righty. All right, so we'll be talking more about research when we're looking at our textbook during class. We'll come across some other research. As I said, mine was done looking at Dr. Stodden's research, and we'll look at that a lot more closely. And there are multiple studies that have come out since this that have similar types of results. So we know it works. We've just got to persuade the people with the money and the power that this is what needs to happen. Okay. Bye. See you tomorrow.